Okay, so now we are recording. Yeah, and I put these on, we have had lots of problems with Kaltura. It seems to come in and out. So what I've been doing, instead of storing the lectures on Kaltura, I record them as videos, and then I upload the videos to my personal YouTube channel site, and you can find them there and download them independent of the Kaltura and Canvas function. Okay. And I should say that the material that I cover in lecture will be a component of the midterm exam. So you have the material, the midterm exam. I've had some questions about this. The midterm exam will consist of questions taken from the reading quizzes that you will have completed by the time of the midterm. And then there'll be essay questions that cover the material that I present in lectures. And so that gives you so you'll have an opportunity by going back and looking at your notes, at the PowerPoint presentations that I upload, and then if you like, going back and reviewing the video presentations on the YouTube channel, you'll be able to get a grasp of that. And as a study guide, I will put out a series of probable essay questions or topics taken from my lectures that will be included in the midterm. Other questions about that and recording? Okay, well, let me go ahead and reshare my screen. And so we are recording now, and we're talking about week 5. And so what we want to do, the material that I'm going to cover in the brief lectures that I give today and on Thursday are the physical non-living processes that support the Earth ecosystem. That's the burden of the material presented in Chapter 4. What are the energy sources that drive these processes? And more important, how does energy distribution around Earth create gradients that drive Earth cycles? And thinking about Earth system cycles and biogeochemical cycles mechanistically, how do they work? How do they exchange? How are they controlled? So those are the brief topics that I want to talk about in my little lecture that I'm going to give now. And then when I finish these few slides, we're going to break out into groups, and you all will be discussing the reading assignment for today, which is the article from the New York Times Magazine that I posted online, and you'll be answering questions. So we want to plunge right in so we leave plenty of time for that topic. You know, we're talking about cycles and feedback and Earth cycles today. You'll discuss the migration article from the New York Times. You want to answer the questions from this. And then also to react emotionally, react analytically to these very challenging findings, which are laid out in this disturbing but interesting and compelling article. So look at it both in terms of dispassionate review of the information that's presented, but also how does it make you feel about your prospects? Because very much the author of the article is talking about looking out of his window and realizing that he and his family have settled in an area which is not safe from predictable environmental stresses. So that's a considerable kind of a burden, kind of a stress on life, and that's something that people across the country and indeed across the world potentially face with increasing frequency and increasing acuity as the challenges of climate change progress. And so we'll come back and we'll discuss that collectively. All right, so I wanted to talk about, you were talking about systems and the mechanisms of systems, and how do systems change, and how are systems controlled. And in this, I want to introduce this concept of feedback. And feedback is a component of environmental change. It's a component of system science. It's the way that systems are controlled both by internal and external factors. And we can, the classic example of feedback is the microphone system. So you've got a, working. My pen doesn't seem to be working. There we go. So you have a microphone, and the microphone is recording a sound, and it sends it to a speaker. So the speaker puts out sound from the microphone. Well, the classic example of feedback is that the microphone begins to pick up the output of the speaker, and that increases the input into the speaker. So this system, you know, and everybody's had this experience. You hear this, you know, somebody starts talking in a microphone, and all of a sudden there's this, you know, uncontrollably unbearable loud noise that comes out. Well, that's an example of positive feedback. I'm sorry, negative, positive feedback. In other words, that the output of the system is driving the system to greater extent. And of course, the negative feedback in this system comes when people in the room, you know, cover their ears and scream, "Turn off the mic, turn off the speaker." So it's an example of positive feedback and then controlled by negative feedback. So positive feedback drives the system in the same direction as the output. In other words, the output from the speaker gets louder, is picked up by the microphone, and feedback in this system pushes the overall output, which is sound, to a higher and higher degree. Negative feedback drives the system in opposite direction to the output. So the negative feedback in this little example is, you know, people in the room saying, "Whoa, you know, it's gotten too loud, you know, turn off the mic or turn down the sound or move the mic away from the speaker." So there's the negative feedback in that system. Okay. And so a large output tends to decrease subsequent outputs. Well, there are many, many, many examples of feedback in systems that we could talk about. I will almost certainly ask you for some examples of feedback mechanisms on the exam, so it's something that you should be able to understand and have examples of. But the one example I wanted to give today was the way in which population growth can be both negative, positive and negative. So if we consider a population which is starting from zero, so, you know, migrants, you know, birds arriving on an island that didn't previously have birds in them, or an invasive species arriving in a new environment where there are no competitors. Initially, what happens is the population begins to reproduce itself. And as the population reproduces itself, it increases in size. Well, with the increase in size, it can grow faster. And indeed, it grows faster and faster. And so in this case, the population is increasing not at a linear rate, but at an exponential rate. And what's driving this rate of increase is the increase in size. So there's a feedback, a positive feedback mechanism, which means that the population increases in size, and then the rate of increase increases faster and faster. So that's the positive feedback side of a population. Well, this is not a permanent condition. Any population growing in an environment will sooner or later outstrip the available resources, with one exception. That exception, well, let's think about what that exception might be. So as the population increases in size, the resources that allow the individuals of the population to survive and to reproduce start to become limiting. And then over time, the population, these limits will tend to stabilize the population around some optimal size. And this optimal size is often referred to as the carrying capacity of the environment in which the population finds itself. So positive feedback along the exponential phase here, and this, you know, this is the very rapid output is being driven in the same direction, you know, by increases in population size. And negative feedback then tends to stabilize population around some stable limit. And so people get confused. Beginners often get confused between positive and negative. Positive feedback, is positive. Well, it should be good. Well, in many cases, that positive feedback, that uncontrolled growth, is not good. It tends to push things out of control and to destabilize things. And so negative feedback, which stabilizes populations or other functions around some more manageable limit, can be a good thing. So positive and negative don't have the same connotation that they would have when we're talking about positive and negative outcomes or interactions. Okay, so the population grows in response to positive feedback, then the population stabilizes due to negative feedback. And the negative feedback is population starts to run out of resources. It's too large for what the environment can provide. Okay, so the one exception to this, populations being controlled, of course, is the human population. And we have not yet stabilized the human population around some consistent value. The population of human beings has been increasing exponentially, for at least 200 years, and we are still in an exponential phase of growth. However, we're beginning to encounter factors which suggest that we may have reached our carrying capacity, and we may have some shocks in store for us. And that's certainly what the article from the New York Times suggests. Okay, so that's one topic, feedback. And the other topic, very much discussed in chapter 4 is the cycling of material in ecosystems. And so we'll talk, and particularly the way that biological populations interact with these cycles will be discussed more, in the characteristics of populations and ecosystems in terms of their living components will be discussed at greater length in the next chapter of Hasensaal and subsequent lectures in this course. But what I wanted to focus on today were cycles of matter in the environment, at a large scale, Earth cycles. And so here is an example of sort of the major geologic cycles of the Earth system. And you're familiar with this, I'm very certain, but we're putting it into the context of the way in which materials are moved around the planet. Okay, so the major geologic cycles are the hydrologic cycle. This is the movement of water, and the big directions of water are evaporation from principally from the ocean, but also from surface water on land, which rises to the atmosphere and then precipitates. And precipitation, tends to move water from the ocean area, because that's the predominant amount of Earth's surface is ocean area. So water tends to move from the ocean to the land, and then falls as rain and runs off. So that's the hydrologic cycle. And of the of the major Earth cycles, the hydrologic cycle tends to be the most complete and the most rapid, the cycle that involves the most components of the Earth system. There is also a rock cycle. So, one of the major outcomes of rainfall in terms of geologic processes is that the rain tends to dissolve, weather, erode the rock component of the terrestrial, the continents, and that material tends to run off as sediment into the ocean. It settles into the deep ocean. So that there's a wearing down of the continental land masses by erosion of sediments. And but that's not the end of the story. Tectonic cycles are moving the ocean plates around, driving the ocean plates under the continental plates, and so there's a long-term tectonic cycle, which is continuing, has the process of renewal for Earth systems and changing Earth continents, and then changing the shape and the size of the ocean basins. If you wanted to have more material on this, take my oceanography course, and we'll go over this quite a bit. But that's the big picture item here. Okay, so what is it that drives these systems? In the case of the tectonic cycles, you know, the source of energy which drives plate tectonics and the tectonic cycles is the heat from the center of the Earth. And that heat is about 60 to 70% residual heat from the processes that formed Earth initially, the impact of, you know, multiple meteors and other rocky components that coalesced into the planet billions of years ago when the planet and the solar system were forming. So there's residual heat left over, and there's also nuclear decay, which is producing heat. So the combination of that residual heat and heat from nuclear decay is a gradient of heat from, you know, its hottest at the center of the Earth, and that heat is you know, driven out through you know, the process of moving the plates around, creating volcanism, creating seafloor spreading, and so forth. So that's a source of heat that drives the tectonic cycles. But let's focus on the hydrocycle and the atmospheric cycles. As we talked about last week, the Earth is unevenly heated. So the equatorial regions are receiving more direct radiation from the sun. So the the heat density tends to be most concentrated at the lower latitudes and less concentrated at the higher latitudes. So there's a gradient of heat, you know, from lower levels on the high latitudes near the poles towards high levels of heat in around the equatorial region. Okay, so that's a gradient, and gradients tend to drive energy cycles. So the Earth is unevenly heated by the sun, producing a gradient of increasing heat towards low latitude. So what processes tend to move this around, or what processes even this out? It's the circulation of atmosphere and ocean moves water and heat to reduce this gradient. Okay, so this is the sort of seasonal gradient of heat, or seasonal distribution of heat across the Earth's surface. We already talked about this. So the high concentrations of heat tend to be a result of seasonal warming. So let's see, so I wanted to talk about this. So one of the things that happens when when the Earth is heated at the equator is that water evaporates, okay, and rises in the atmosphere, forms clouds. Okay, well, it's not enough to say that water is evaporating and forming clouds, but that with that movement of material, i.e. water, goes the movement of energy. And that has to do with the specific qualities, the specific properties of this amazing compound that we depend on, water. And so water has the property of a latent heat. Inputting energy into liquid water, 1 degree increase in temperature produces 1 calorie. 1 calorie of energy produces 1 degree of change in temperature. So that's a linear effect that heats water from its near solid state to its near gaseous state. Because of the way that water is structured, the hydrogen molecules and the hydrogen and oxygen atoms, there is heat is required, excess heat is required to break the water into gaseous particles. And so to change water from a liquid to a gas, you have to put in 540 calories per gram to complete this evaporation. So that means that when water vapor forms, it carries with it this latent heat of vaporization. Likewise, when water fuses into ice, you have to remove an additional 80 calories of green to make this transition. So these jumps in state that come with heat mean that when water is transferred as a vapor from lower latitudes to higher latitudes and then precipitates as rain in the higher latitudes, that heat is released. And so that has the effect or that process has the effect of moving heat from the equator towards the higher latitudes. Okay, so that movement of heat is extremely important, and that's what creates temperate regions in Europe and North America. That also stops the tropics from becoming unbearably warm. That allows life to continue in the tropics instead of heating them up to the point of So this occurs in higher latitudes as well. So the net result is we move heat from the equator toward the poles. And so there's a giant material flux. Annually about 85 centimeters is moved onto or off to every square meter of the Earth. And oceans have a net evaporative loss. Land has a net precipitation gain. The excess water on land flows into the ocean to replace the loss due to evaporation. That's the sort of steady state. But there are long-term changes that can occur, and the principal geologic cycle that drives this are the glaciation and deglaciation. So during glacial stages, i.e. when the Earth has been covered by large ice sheets, there's a net loss from the ocean. Then as these ice sheets melt, there's a net gain to the ocean. And one of the factors driving the rise of sea level, of course, is the melting of the ice caps and the melting of ice sheets, which is causing the ocean sea level to rise. And it's rising, geologically, it's rising at a rapid rate. We don't notice that rapid rate because we tend to think in human time scales as opposed to geologic time scales. But actually, the rate of increase in sea level is pretty rapid right now, geologically speaking. There are also surface ocean currents, and these ocean currents are driven by a combination of excess heating, heat gradients from the top of the ocean towards the greater depths. There are also the Coriolis effect also affects the direction and the energy, the way in which these currents move. One of the principal features of ocean currents are the formation of large gyres, and these are sort of circulatory patterns that occur in the middle of oceans. In the northern hemisphere, they're moving toward the right, and in the southern hemisphere, they're moving toward the left. This is a result of Coriolis forcing. This is discussed in chapter 4, but these large-scale currents affect not just the movement of water, but also the movement of heat. And so the Gulf Stream, very famously transfers heat from the tropics towards the higher latitudes, and the heat transferred by the Gulf Stream tends to make Europe a much more temperate and habitable place. And if you look at a map of the continents, you can see that Europe is at, relatively speaking, at much higher latitude than most of the continental United States. So France is at about the same latitude as Canada, but France has a much warmer and wetter climate than Canada does for the most part. So this motion of movement of water in currents also transfers heat and also has the result of maintaining temperate conditions across the globe. There's also long-term circulation. There's something called the ocean conveyor belt, and that's driven by a combination of mixing of cold water and warm salty water, principally in the Labrador Sea and off the coast of Newfoundland. A combination of salty cold water tends to sink to the bottom of the ocean, and it moves around in a giant cycle here. It can't complete the return to the higher latitudes here because it's blocked by the Bering Sea land masses. And so it swings back around and eventually is picked up by the Gulf Stream. So this is a cycle here. This cycle takes between 1,000 and 1,200 years to complete. So a parcel of water that sinks down here, will move around on average and come back about 1,000 years later. So this is a large-scale process and long-term process. There's concern that climate change is altering the way that this global conveyor belt works. And there's concern that we're not getting the same feeding of the Gulf Stream by the temperature gradients. And so there may be some long-term changes in this pattern that would produce unpredictable effects in terms of climate and weather. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to go ahead. I'll open the floor up for questioning here. Are there any questions about the material I've covered? I've talked through a lot of this very rapidly. The reason for that is I just want to emphasize, some of the key points in, chapter 4, which is packed full of a lot of information. So if any of you have any questions, please bring them up right now. Questions over the material that I've covered here. And is there, please understand that when I talk about something in lecture here, that's because I particularly want to emphasize it, and I would like you to get this on board in terms of your understanding of it so that you'd be able to discuss it in an exam question in the midterm, for example. So is that clear to everyone? Okay, I'm assuming that it is. Has everybody had a chance? You can say yes or no in your response section. So has everybody had a chance to download or access the reading assignment that I gave on Monday? You can just go ahead and answer yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, if you click on the participants button, if you click on the participants button, it brings up a list of everybody here, and you'll see that there's some responses here, yes and no. So if I'm looking for feedback from the class, this is a good way to give that. So everybody is telling me that, yes, in fact, you've had a chance to access this. Okay, so I'm going to break you into groups now. What you should do in your teams is to bring up that article. So somebody can bring up that article and then discuss this article in terms of the questions that I raise, and also in terms of how you react to the article. And then we'll reconvene the plenary session when we get back. All right, so I'm going to break you into groups now. If you don't go into a group, I'll be asking you what your assignment is. Okay. So Carrie, I'm going to put you in only clams. Carolina Garcia, please tell me what
the Planeteers.
Planeteers. I should know that by now, I know. But Darren, and you're in
Aquatic Junkies.
Aquatic Junkies, that's it. Dalia.
Planeteers.
Planeteers. Emily.
The Wayfinders.
Wayfinders. Kate.
Team Title.
Team Title. I'd like to get this fixed. And Whitney.
Green Machine.
Green Machine. Okay.
or something? Like, I don't know how.
Oh, well, I know, I
Guys,
think in one of the announcements, he sent out a link, and that link goes to all the Zoom meetings for the groups.
hey guys, everything going okay? Questions for me? No? All right. So you had a chance to read the article. It's kind of a sobering read, isn't it? I mean, you read it and you go through it, and it's kind of an eye-opener. And I thought that that would be a good takeoff point for discussion. There's also a lot of references in there. Remind me what your team project is. Your team class project. What were you taking on?
Melting ice caps.
Melting ice caps. Okay, so that speaks directly to sea level rise, doesn't it? Which is talked about in this article, and there's some nice references there. So you should be able to, pull in some of these themes. Okay, I'm gonna get around to the different rooms. So, you have any other questions for me? All right, I'll let you get back to your work then, and we'll see you in about half an hour. Hello, Aquanauts. Just drop. You all got the article. You had a chance to read the article.
Yeah, we're talking about it right now.
Yeah, it's a sobering article, isn't it?
Yes.
It's
really
horrible.
Yeah, frightening, frankly frightening stuff. Here's a question. So remind me what your class project was, your topic.
We're doing the effects of plastic on our water and food systems.
Okay, so that doesn't speak directly to the question raised in topics raised in the article. That's sort of an overall issue of environmental quality and stability in global ecosystems, and so those are other things there. So it's not an immediate one-to-one relationship that you can pick references out of this, but the sort of the general theme of environmental insecurity, maybe we should put it, or climate insecurity, also relates to plastic. So you can make a connection. It's not quite as direct a connection as from the article to sea level rise or flooding or fire danger, but there is a connection. So you might think about that.
All right. Environmental insecurity, got it.
Environmental insecurity. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna let you get on with your work, but if you have any questions, you can text me, or and otherwise we'll see you in about 25 minutes.
Okay.
Did everybody read it, first of all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I read a good bit.
Yeah, I read it before class.
Did you get it? Hi, how you doing, junkies? Did everybody get a chance? Did you get a chance when you were reading it to pop out some of the citations and the links that were embedded in the article?
A couple. I did actually check out the one from the gentleman from FSU, the sociologist. I thought that was kind of interesting that there was an FSU professor that was involved in the story, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, well, we are a top tier research university, and there's a lot of people that are working on climate in a variety of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Remind me what your class project is.
Permafrost.
Permafrost. Okay, so you can
We
draw.
haven't quite narrowed it down as
Uh-huh.
yet to exactly our focus, but it's probably going to be greenhouse, something to do with greenhouse gases and globally, and not just in a local position or local place.
Okay, so you can draw some pretty direct lines from the material in this article to the stuff that you're thinking about in terms of the consequences of the climate change, which is driven by permafrost melting, etc. So it's it's a good idea to be alert to those kinds of connections, and you can do work in your session here that will apply directly to your team project. Okay, any questions for me?
Real quickly, the first question: who is affected by the California wildfires? I mean, the story goes into a lot of other issues other than just the California wildfires, with the flooding and Louisiana, especially with Hurricane Laura. I mean, there's a lot more people affected than just in California, but it didn't really go into details as far as across the country. I mean, it says eventually fires could be sprouting up, as far west or far east as Washington. But I mean, is that how we should answer that question? Like,
yeah.
Based on the future or based on now?
Well, both, but I mean, there are some things that drive these fire cycles. There's much more forest management in the southeast than there is in the west. And that's because of the different types of forests we have here, the history of forest management in the southeast as opposed to the west, and then also differences in climate. I mean, right now, the southeast is getting a lot of water, whereas the west is really drying out. So, there are sort of physical factors and processes which are driving the impact, or differentiating the impact among different groups. But then the article points out that changes in temperature and changes in coastal stability might push people into this fire zone, right?
Yeah.
So it's a complicated picture, and that's what I'm looking for, is to just reflect on those different possibilities. Okay. Other questions? All right, I'll let you get at it. We'll be back together in about 20 minutes. Hello, homeboys, home people.
Hello.
Homeboys. Just dropping in to see how you're doing. You all had a chance to read the article.
Yes, we're working on those questions.
And you're working on your questions. Okay, well, here's a quick question for you. Remind me your class project topic.
Microplastics and the process of how they end up in the ocean.
Okay, so you don't have a direct link from your topic to the material that's covered. So you're not dealing with flooding or sea level rise or those large scale changes, but you are dealing with sort of environmental insecurity. Where the environmental quality, ecosystem services are threatened by some process like microplastics. So it's a good idea to be sort of alert to possibilities for finding material, finding research sources that you can apply towards your topic. But it looks like there's not as many for the topic of microplastics. Were you able, when you were reading the New York Times article, did you take time to break out some of the links to external sources? if you look in the article, there's some great links to scientific papers, maps, other things that, outline a lot of, go into a lot greater detail than he can cover in the paper. So, look at some of those links. I don't know that there's any of them that directly speak to the problem of, pollution and contaminants and that sort of thing. But, in terms of the issue of environmental instability, there's an awful lot in this article, including links that give you more detail. Okay. So do you have any questions for me about how to proceed with the assignment? Okay, all right. Well, I'll let you get back to work. We'll be getting together in about at about 1:30. So got a few minutes.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Leave the state because like they're wasting money insuring houses that will either be burned and in Florida's case flooded. I mean, I feel like that affects communities.
That definitely, yeah, it affects communities. It definitely affects people because it affects the people. Statewide insurance companies are usually a good thing for rates.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing,
So it'd be a
Tectalix?
positive for the people.
I'm just dropping in to see how you're going here. It was interesting, the conversation we had this morning about, insurance companies. If you look in the article, they talk about, how California insurance policies were forced by the legislature to follow the Florida model of insuring, guaranteeing insurance, and, what sort of impact would that have on, how people decide or don't decide to stay in an area.
We were actually just discussing that, which was very funny.
As you came in.
Okay, great. Well, yeah. So
Also,
this is a I thought this would be right in your wheelhouse, this particular article here. So okay. So it sounds like you're right on track. You have a question for me?
yes. So on question 1, the affected West Coast wildfires, he doesn't specifically talk about affected communities except for one, but that was for sea level rise. Should we just kind of do like insurance stuff and like
Well, I mean,
the effects of the fire?
why don't you think a little bit about, where fire is going to be distributed? And one of the things that sort of, he identifies as being surprising is, he's living in areas or areas that insurance companies would rate as being zero risk for fire are suddenly not zero risk anymore because the conditions of fire have changed so radically over, a tiny period of time, like 5 or 10 years. Suddenly, it doesn't help you to be surrounded by parking lots. Fire can get into your area. So, I would just like to see some discussion of, what sort of populations, socioeconomic groups are impacted by this. You probably know something about housing prices in general in California, and people living in, for example, the example of Paradise, California, which was destroyed in 2018 by the horrible fires there, killed hundreds of people. That community was there because that was one place where the housing prices were relatively affordable compared to like the bigger population centers. So that created a certain demographic within that region. So I would just like you to think a little bit about that, maybe outside the box and beyond what's exactly in the article. Okay.
All right, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Move on. Let's see. I'll leave the room. So we'll be back together in about 15 minutes.
So wait, where did you go for undergrad? Because I know you're a grad student now.
I went to Georgia Southern.
Oh, awesome. Okay. I'm in the process of like applying to grad schools and stuff right now. And it's like extremely overwhelming and like very scary. Like I had to get a consultant to help me because like there's no resources here to figure out how to apply and stuff.
Yeah.
Hey guys, just dropping in to see how you're doing on the assignment here. You all had a chance to read the article?
Yeah, we all did previous to class, and we have done the 4 questions.
Okay,
on a
great.
collaboration.
So remind me, team title, what your class project is.
We're doing the Marine Protected Areas project.
Mm-hmm. So can you draw any links about marine protected areas to this article, or is it just too separate?
I'm thinking that the only link that I could really see, or not the only, but one of the obvious links that I can see is just the mass movement of people. And depending on like where this goes, based on where people are going to be moving in the future and how the climate's looking, if we're going to be able to mitigate some of these issues, more people could be going to the coasts or away from California to the coasts over here, which definitely could put some pressure on the size and the areas of marine protected areas, because people want to go where it's pretty and the water's blue, but that's probably not necessarily a good idea to put a big house on the beach. But how are you going to argue as like a local politician to protect that area when someone's offering you $10 million for a little tiny piece of land? Like, it's really hard to distinguish that pressure. So definitely the movement of people and how much of the US population is concentrated already on the East Coast. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think another direct factor could be, I mean, it's all the way in California, but it could be like soot falling from the atmosphere or blocking light so that there's not as much primary production in those areas if you're looking for like a more direct effect of the fires. Although it's very far away, I still think that's possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of coastal forested land is burning in California, and that burning produces runoff which goes into the ocean, and that runoff contains a lot of, some of it is nutrient, but so there's a shift of material driving the the nutrient supply, the toxicity of the water or contaminants in the water. So there can be some direct impacts on marine communities from the loss of forested ecosystems on the associated coastline. Yeah, so it's a good idea to sort of think about connections to whenever we're doing this, whenever you're working on your class project. And one of the things that I found, and it's kind of an exciting thing, is that when you study something or you learn something, you start seeing it elsewhere. So when you learn about this process, all of a sudden you start seeing it in, the question. So, kind of keep that in mind as you go forward and prepare your class project, and start, picking out things that we cover in the chapter in the reading in my lectures, and looking at how those concepts, factors, resources apply to the project that you're putting together. Okay.
Cool,
right. So we have about another 10 minutes in your group. So you guys have done your questions already. Good for you. But try to delve into it deeper. Try to discuss, how you react to it in terms of this. This is sort of terrible dynamic that he points out, where he's saying, warming is going to make the southeast less habitable. And push people towards temperate areas. Well, these temperate areas might be also subject to, forest fires or other sorts of environment impact. Okay. All right. So we'll be back together in about a little less than 10 minutes, and I'm going to move along.
And they're mean.
Hello, Cabbage Patch. How are you doing?
Good.
Good, how are you?
Fine. Did you got the article? You read it? You're understanding the questions? Do you have any idea, any issues with the assignment so far?
Actually, yeah. When it says to complete this assignment, write up your findings with references and submit online. Are we like finding outside references to answer these questions? Or do we just like, do you want us to cite this article and just answer these questions based upon the article and therefore citing the article as a reference?
Well, I mean, one thing you can do is certainly cite the article. If you look in the article, there are some links to other factors. So in the article, for example, there's a link to maps, a whole series of detailed discussion about the maps. And the maps, you know, show areas that are going to be impacted by, you know, sea level rise, flooding, you know, changes in food production, lots of different factors, so that you can, you know, look at that and, you know, point to some of those as examples, because you're not just regurgitating the material in the chapter, but you're also, you know, getting outside of what he specifically talks about and, you know, discussing that more in depth. Remind me, Cabbage Patch, what your term project is? What's your topic for your?
We're doing biodiversity, but like focusing on conservation of like Florida's endangered species.
Okay. So, you know, you know, what's going to happen to Florida's endangered species, you know, with this, you know, climate change that we can predict that's coming to Florida. You know, how is that going to impact that? And, you know, what happens if people have to move away from the coast? You know, where do they go? You know, where is, you know, if people have to relocate from, you know, Jacksonville. One of the other students in the class lives in Jacksonville, and she was saying that, you know, they're currently totally flooded. You know, they're facing, you know, just because of the hurricane that's currently way out in the Gulf, way out in the Atlantic. You know, they're getting flooding in Jacksonville.
I should call my mom.
You should call it.
I didn't know there was flooding.
Well, that's what she said anyway. That I guess her house or her family's house is sort of between the ocean and the intercoastal. So, you know.
Yeah. Oh, my house is going to be underwater by 2050. Childhood home is sunk. I'm ready.
Oh, man. Well, how does that make you feel? I mean, you know, what do you think about that? You know,
like that's what the article made me feel, was just like, where are we supposed to live?
Yeah.
Where are we supposed to move to, especially when all like the plots of land are just being sold in those highly disturbed, threatening areas like dust and climate change.
Yeah. Well,
so, like, where is it to move?
Where do you go? And, you know, it's not just Americans.
Where?
You know, that's one of the topics that I want to introduce there. But, you know, so what's the moral obligation of people from California or say Minnesota? Because he says, well, Minnesota might be a place where, you know, people could go where, you know, it would be more attractive to live. Well, what obligation do the people from Minnesota have to accept, you know, people who are relocating from California or Florida or, you know, Georgia or something like that? Well, you know, according to our Constitution and general laws and practices, if you want to move to Minnesota, go ahead. There's nothing stopping you. But, you know, if you apply that across national boundaries and international movement, you know, what obligation do we have as a country to take in refugees from, you know, other countries that are rendered uninhabitable by climate change? And that's a, you know, that's a really thorny topic, you know, especially given the current political climate. So I'm going to talk about that when we get back. So if you have any questions for me, otherwise we're going to be reforming in just about 5 minutes to, you know, see if we can have a little class discussion about this.
So those references will be the hyperlinks. I just wanted to double check.
Well, no, use, you know, go ahead and write out the reference according to the citation format that, you know, that you've been given. Okay. Elise, did you get kicked out of your place?
I did.
Where do you need to be?
Beach, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, question for me?
Hi, Mr. McDonald. I currently have one question, and then we have a question as a group.
Yeah.
One, I wanted to know for the quizzes, for the like homework quizzes, are we allowed 2 attempts?
You should be. Somebody was saying you're only getting 1 attempt, and that
Yeah, I
might-
used to get 2, but I only get 1 now, which is kind of weird. So I don't know what I was supposed to do about that.
Okay, well, that's somehow that, I mean, we'll go back and check that. So I'm sorry I can't do anything about, the results from this week because it changes everybody and I can't really make, but I'll make sure that, the other quizzes allow you with 2 attempts.
Okay, thank you. And then for the group, we actually had our milestone meeting this morning, and nobody came to the Zoom. So we wanted to let you know that.
I didn't come. I didn't know that I was supposed to confer with you. I only had one for 9 o'clock.
Oh, well, when I made sure too, I took like a picture of it too, because I was gonna change the time. When I changed the time, I said we were already scheduled for 10:40 this morning. So I didn't change it. I was just like, we all agreed on the 10:40, but yeah, nobody came to the Zoom or anything.
Okay, well, I should have come to the Zoom then. I didn't see it in my calendar. Can we reschedule? Because I do want to meet with you. I'll make a note to contact you and try to reschedule. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay, Planeteers. Well, I will get in touch with you. Maybe hopefully we can reschedule for the next day or 2.
Okay.
I do mornings. Carrie does afternoons. So
Could I possibly just go in now and do it? Like just click another one?
go to another
Do another appointment?
Well, I wanted to meet with the teams to go over your milestone 1 submission.
Yeah. I thought that like only one person has to do it, and then like it's for the group.
Well, it's better if everybody's there.
Oh yeah. So I was asking because I know the appointment making process, only one person has to make the appointment, but everybody comes to the Zoom.
That's right.
So could I do that right now, or do you want to just wait to
Oh,
contact?
can you make the appointment right now? Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. What time would work?
Guys.
I mean, tomorrow morning, is anyone
Yeah, I'm
busy
free
tomorrow morning?
tomorrow on Wednesday.
I can't do tomorrow morning. I have work all morning.
Uh,
But I can do Thursday at 10:40.
Yeah, I could too.
Yeah, I can do that again.
Same.
Thursday work, Professor?
Thursday at 10:40?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll go ahead and put that into the calendar. So I have a record of that, and then I'll plan on meeting you 10:40 on Thursday.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. All right. So I think we're going to rejoin the close all the breakout rooms in a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we should all be back in the main session right now. And I wanted to open the floor up I guess, there's a lot of topics raised in this article. Does anybody have any, and some people in the different groups were sharing their reactions with me. Does anybody have any comments that they'd like to make? How did this article, make you feel? How did, what's your, did this teach you something or suggest ideas that you hadn't previously considered? Anybody want to comment on that, or should I call on a team, or?
I have a comment.
Sure.
We always hear about all these things, like how they could happen and stuff, and it's sometimes as Americans we're just sort of living in our own bubble. But now we can see that this is already starting to happen all over the place, and I think that's really eye-opening for me in particular.
Yeah, I had the same reaction, and I've had the same reaction, particularly this year. The combination of the fires, the pandemic, flooding from hurricanes, this, very intense hurricane season that we're still in the middle of. There seems to be a pressure from a lot of different directions. And then the political instability, also makes it, just sort of, it all cumulatively, makes for a sort of an uncertain environment. And the environment is both political, social, and of course, natural or man-made. Other reactions, other people want to comment on Joseph's thoughts.
I have a comment that I thought was interesting.
Okay, Darren and then Mary.
I felt, I just never had really thought about the fact that so many people flock towards these areas where, there's so many natural disasters. It makes sense, people retiring in Florida and people wanting that lifestyle in California. And that part of it makes sense, but I found it even more interesting when it started talking about eventually people are going to, because of global warming and places like Minnesota and the Dakotas are going to start warming up and become more temperate, and it's going to really have an influx of people going to those locations, and that those economies like Buffalo it mentioned, and and Pittsburgh and Duluth, Minnesota, for instance, that their economies are going to, be booming in the next, 50 to 75 years because everybody's going to start moving away from these storms. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I thought it was, can I comment on that as well?
Well, Mary is next, and then, so go ahead, Mary. What did you want to say?
Just going off of what Joseph was saying, the author comments that there's a disconnection between with Americans, with where our resources come from, and that disconnection just exacerbates our climate problems because people aren't able to rationalize where our goods are coming from and what a big impact either drought and wildfire will have on just America's production of crops, especially in the Great Plains. I know he mentioned another Dust Bowl, which is another economic downturn that I don't think we can take in the next 10 years, probably.
Right. Yeah. So there is a sort of unpredictable effect of all this. And, Americans tend to be decoupled from where our food comes from, where we get other resources, because we're so used to this system that, brings us goods, services, food, etc. And what was the next comment? Somebody else wanted to make a comment before Mary.
When we had discussed that people were going to be moving to cities that hadn't had a lot of people, I found it also interesting in the article how it discussed, can these cities, are they going to be able to keep this many people? Are they, able to do so? And I got stuck on that thought as well for a while.
Yeah. Well, a comment that something I wanted to throw out for the discussion was, so that one of the things that the article talks about in a really interesting and kind of unintuitive way is how, these are forcing, people to move towards, Detroit, for example. Well, Detroit's, has a cold climate and, has been in economic decline for quite a while. Well, suddenly, over the next decade or so, Detroit may become a very attractive place. So you get this cycle of population movement, which is kind of unpredictable. Well, within America, American citizens or American residents are generally speaking able to move wherever they want, given that they have the economic and social resources to do so. what about the question of, but nonetheless, within the United States, we can predict a lot of instability as a result of people having to relocate. One of the questions I pose there is, should we refer to people who are being forced to relocate or choosing to relocate, would the term refugee apply to them? So that's one question. And the other thing I wanted to throw out is sort of a moral question, and I'll pose this and then open the floor here. What is right now, the United States has a policy of offering sanctuary to people who are fleeing political instability and violence in their home countries. Now, of course, that process of seeking political sanctuary and asylum has been, really altered by the policies of the Trump administration. Nonetheless, it remains law that we're supposed to consider asylum when people show up at our borders and say that they're fleeing from, political violence, etc. What about people who are fleeing from environmental disturbance or environmental instability? Do they deserve the same kind of status as political refugees? So what do you think? Does anybody have any comment on that?
I have a question, actually.
Sure. Vanessa.
I believe that aren't refugees, aren't they protected by international law? So with the whole Trump administration having some type of effect on it, I mean, wouldn't that, like, the international law still extend past just, domestic law?
Well, international law does not take priority over national law. That's something that the Trump administration has made very clear in terms of national policy. So there are lots of international laws and treaties that we as a nation under the current leadership have moved away from. Yes, according to United Nations sanction and policy, refugees should have some protected status. However, refugees tend to be framed in terms of refugees who are fleeing conflict or fleeing oppression. People in Sudan, for example, are refugees. There's a lot of refugee movement in the Middle East, of conflict chasing people out. But the concept of climate refugees, I don't think has yet got the same currency. I don't know. What do you all think? Any comments on that?
Well, I do know that refugees are described as a person fleeing from either war, prosecution, or a natural disaster, according to the UN Refugee Agency. So, I mean, they usually flee from things that are uncontrolled, things that they can't control. So a climate crisis should be, I think, an appropriate reason to be classified as a refugee.
Okay, well, you have a good point there about fleeing from natural disasters, but typically the people who have been awarded in the United States, for example, temporary protective status, are people who are fleeing from a specific event. A hurricane which destroyed and flooding which destroyed a big area. The earthquake in Haiti produced a lot of people who were allowed to come to the United States under temporary protective status. And, the current administration is trying to end that for many folks. But that's kind of different from, drought, for example, which is more of a slow moving crisis. And so, perhaps it's the case that we need to, rethink international law in such a way as to, broaden that. But what about as a matter of national policy? Should we in the United States consider opening our borders to people from, say, Central America who are being displaced by climate change? Because there are people in Central America who are being displaced by climate change, and Guatemala, El Salvador, etc., that have produced a lot of refugees. The so-called caravans of refugees. One of the reasons that people were displaced from those areas were multiple years of crop failure due to drought. So there are environmental refugees already taking place. What sort of moral responsibility do we have as a country to help them? None? Some?
I feel like because it is starting to happen in America as well, there's going to be a lot more like of an awakening of people realizing that this is a problem and that we should help our neighbors because it will happen to us eventually.
Yeah.
But I also think that America is such a big country and such a big landmass that there's probably enough space for people to just relocate within the country and not have to get into international laws or anything like that. Because, like you just said, you can move freely around America. So, if you're in Florida and sea levels rise so much that you lose your home, you know that you can just go to Ohio, for example, and there will be space for you. Um,
Right.
so, maybe that will also make it so that Americans don't search for that asylum outside of our own country,
Mhm.
which would make it, I believe, hard for them to also believe that we should help other people because we can move within our country, so they should be able to as well. I'm not saying that's the correct way to look at it, but I'm saying as I think that this might be a thought process that comes up.
Okay, good point. Good
I
point.
have like
Go ahead.
question about that.
Dixie, go ahead.
Kind of. Okay, so like if we do implement like moving around in our own country, where do we move land-wise where that doesn't then deplete the natural resources of that area, which then in turn makes that area more like we've already ruined one place. Like let's say Florida, we've ruined the sea level rise. So we're just like abandoning one place instead of thinking of ways to like stop the threat instead of moving away from the threat and then causing another threat in this new area of landmass. Like how do we prioritize human needs and like ways that we can balance human needs with politically moving people coming in or out of the country? I guess it's more of a question that I have than a statement.
Yeah, well, Dixie, I think you've sort of opened the door to a lot of really imponderable or difficult, challenging concepts. So right now we live in a country where freedom of movement is just sort of natural. We all assume that if we want to pack up and take a job in North Carolina, we're free to do that. But if there were sort of environmental extremities, vulnerable areas, places where the population, where there were delicate ecosystems that might be threatened by population growth, then maybe you would want to manage that. But would that require a very different political system from the one that we have now? I just throw that out there. Do we have the kind of political system, is our political system necessarily the right one for making decisions, when you have to have sort of a large oversight over changes?
I think.
Go ahead, Kurt.
Okay, I think it's hard because our system is all it wants to get for everything it gives, and in order to help all this, we have to be okay with giving and not getting, even have giving and having things taken away for what we give, because it's like it's not economic to be environmental, really. It's not economic to necessarily help people and take people in, because what are they bringing with them? What are they offering? And so we need to, I think it's going to take, I don't know. I've always thought that, like, man, what if all the like rich people in the world just got together and just helped us out with doing a lot of these things with money? But that's never going to happen. And it's not their responsibility either. But like, it's almost what we need. We need to be okay with giving a lot and not necessarily getting back what we're paying for. And we got to kind of keep doing that in order to make any headway on the environment and just taking care of people.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. Well, look, so we've gone past this the normal time limit of the class, but I will leave the discussion going until 2 o'clock. And so anybody who wants to hang around and discuss these things is welcome to do so, but you're also allowed to leave if you have other classes or whatever you want. So let me say in response to Kurt's comments that really we have a system of government and a system of society which is sort of developed under one set of circumstances. We've had the expansion of the United States was, present, or the condition of the continent when settlers arrived and during hundreds of years of development. We've taken advantage of plentiful resources, plentiful space, relative internal stability. We haven't had any, major wars, with the exception of the Civil War. Our landmass and the states have been relatively conflict-free. So, our society is developed under those sets of circumstances. But potentially, if you read the article and, consider that and other factors, you can see that the natural system is putting real challenges onto our way of governance that potentially we haven't faced before. And I'll give you an example of why I think that's, why that's particularly challenging for United States, for US society. Let's consider the response to the coronavirus. If we look at countries that have managed the coronavirus effectively, they've done so with a level of central planning and, also willingness of the population to be governed in sort of specifically centrally planned ways. The extreme example would be China, which essentially locked everybody down, said, okay, you have to have a cell phone app, and your cell phone app is going to give your virus status, and before you can travel or even go out of your house, you have to be able to verify that you're, virus free. And so, by imposing this very, heavy control by central government authority, the Chinese were able to control the spread of the virus. Well, contrast that with the United States, where, we can't agree, we're polarized, the central authorities are questioned and confused. This is, in part, this is, people blame President Trump on this. And, I think perhaps with some justification, or certainly the government could have responded differently to that. But there's also a sort of a component of, how our society is structured and the way that, our habits of freedom of choice and individual empowerment, makes it difficult to impose sort of central command. Do you have any comments or thoughts about that concept?
Yeah, like in the United States, the most we can ever really do is just like suggest something to the general public, like a big wide rule like that, or unless our whole government agrees on it, then we can make changes like that. But we're sort of designed to be slow as a government, and we're sort of stacked against each other right now. So we're lacking the cohesion to require big, like bold, like policy changes like that affect everyone. Unless it's just like hitting a protester with your car or something, that's no problem for us.
Well, that's
Yeah,
legal in Florida, all right?
I agree, and I was going to say something too about how lately with the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, people have just been passing the blame on to smaller entities. With the response with the president, he wanted to pass the responsibility on to then the governors, who then some governors passed the responsibility on to then the mayors. It's just this blame that is just being passed down a chain, really.
Yeah, it's sort of, there aren't clear lines of responsibility, or you would have thought there were clear lines of responsibility. The CDC, for example, should be an absolute scientific authority, and they need to steer clear of politics, but their recommendations, their findings, their the way they view things should be accepted as fact. And we don't have that, so we've sort of undermined that. And that's that's in the face of a challenge which is, it's severe, but it's not as acute as it could be. I think I was commenting that, the pandemic, the corona pandemic, is really disruptive and really serious, but it's not like the Black Death, or Ebola. It's not like, wiping people out. It's imposing this, this major problem. 200,000 Americans dead, Americans dying at a rate, faster than we lost soldiers during World War II. I mean, in World War II, we lost about 400,000 soldiers to the conflict. Well, we've lost, and that was over 4.5 years, 3.5 years, I guess. And over less than 1 year, we've lost 200,000 Americans. So the rate of mortality due to the virus is greater than it was during World War II. Nonetheless, it's still relatively small compared to the overall population, yet it's producing all this dislocation and trauma and uncertainty. So, environmental factors, worse pandemics, additional pandemics, points out our vulnerability. Other comments?
I mean,
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, Mary, sorry.
No, go ahead. Mine's a bit off topic.
Oh, I was just going to say that over time, it just has put a lot of responsibility on the actual people, like students, like with us going back to school and kids and families and stuff. They've just tried to, not only deviate the blame, that the responsibility actually has fallen on us as people to protect one another, because we're being, schools are opening. And I understand, obviously, that this is such a drastic change. Businesses should open, I understand. But, it really does it starts to fall on us as citizens to really take care of this pandemic.
I really like that phrase. Go ahead, Mary. You had something you wanted to say. I wanted to react to what Vanessa said, but.
Go ahead and comment. Go ahead and comment.
Well, I guess what I was going to say is that there's a simple message out of the corona pandemic, which I really haven't heard. And to me, that message is, if we have to take care of each other, we really have to take care of each other, because, we can't rely on a big monolithic government to do it for us, because the government isn't, in fact, monolithic. We have to care for each other. And, there are a lot of structural inequities that stop us from caring for each other. The fact that we don't have a national health plan, for example, means that healthcare delivery, testing, all of these things are being disseminated from sort of individual private concerns, whether they're hospital chains or insurance companies or doctors groups or whatever. They're the ones that are responsible for healthcare, and that sort of splits everything up. So, we have to care for each other, but our mechanisms for doing that are kind of frayed, and they're frayed by, racial inequality, political, polarization. There are a lot of things pulling us apart, when what we need to be doing is coming together and caring for each other. And that's that really makes me concerned. Other comments?
Just in the article, we were talking about policy, and I saw it pop up in the group chat also, but I mean, redlining in the 1930s started, and the comment mentions blue lining, and like, we're going to just start disproportionately affecting these same groups of people because of environmental hazards instead of housing standards. And it's just going to become such a big problem. I loved this article. It's exactly what I want to study in my master's. So.
Okay, great, yeah. And I think I said this several times, but look at the links in the article, because they sort of point you to some other sources of information. And if you go to those other sources of information, they have other links. So you can use this article as a jumping off place for a lot of research. And if you think about your class project, there may be some some real resources that you can find by reading this. Hannah, did you have a comment?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say how even I feel like a majority of us do try to help those around us, and you always see kind of any broad issue that's happening in our country, it's getting fought from the ground up. So even like in Flint, there's people in Flint trying to handle the situation on their own and with the help from people around the country, when it should be the government trying to help them out as well. Like, we can only go so far as citizens. We can try our best to help everyone around us, but it really comes down to like what the government's going to allow us to do. And so that's just, when you were talking about like helping those around us, I feel like with the pandemic too, like if we're all wearing a mask, that's helping. I believe in wearing a mask and everything, but like people see our government not implementing any kind of regulation or restriction on it, so they think that it's not something that they have to like be concerned with either.
Yeah, I want to show this particular picture because I found this picture incredibly moving. This is in that article. And, this sort of gets to this question of care and neighbors. And I think that, we can be proud of our society and the degree to which people do as neighbors come together and spontaneously help each other out through volunteerism, through just, reaction to disaster, telling your neighbor, hey, you got to get out, the fire is coming, whatever it is, helping people who are flooded out, helping them relocate. We are a caring society. And this picture where, everybody's sort of, clearly not dressed in their Sunday best, and, everybody's focused on this one poor victim, and you can sort of see that focusing of care. And it's really, I don't know, I found this a very moving picture. It's sort of a snapshot, but it sort of captures that dynamic of neighborhood, neighborly care. And, one of the questions is, how do we take that basic impulse, which I think is very much part of our society, and expand it, and scale it up to the, to be a response to the kind of challenges that we're facing. So I guess we're at 2 o'clock. I'm gonna, end this, but does anybody want to react to that before we close?
I was gonna say this picture kind of makes me sad just because of the fact that it's like what happened to lead to it, which just makes me like worried about like living in 100+ degree weather without water and electricity.
Yeah. Right.
But also, maybe we'll get through it. Maybe something good will happen.
Well, there is the Chinese character for crisis is, opportunity and danger. So there's danger, and there's also, opportunities that danger, pose. So, this is an opportunity to, rethink our healthcare system, for example, as a consequence of, the coronavirus. Whether or not we'll do that, is a big question. And so it's an open question. Well, I'm going to end the class for today. Thanks to everybody who hung around and participated. I'll try to do that because I think a lot of times we get to the point where, we've had our discussion and people want to, discuss things further. So, go ahead and, think about your team project for the week, and make sure you've read and understood the material in the chapter in Hasensaal. And then I'll see you all either in conference or on Thursday. Okay? All right, I'm going to end the class now. Goodbye.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.